Believe it or not, more than 160 languages are spoken in New Zealand. There are yearly events that celebrate the unique languages heard across the motu, and this week the spotlight is on the language from the little-known Pacific island of Rotuma.
Le'e, ela po'o maro, ka mahava ma oie, ela hoia poang ma tino anoa, ela luang ni renti. Yo ianki tiva of hinit, kangola nasi ea tiva kanis pumoed.
According to UNESCO, the Rotuman language is listed as endangered, along with 4 other Pacific languages: Tokelauan, Niuean, Cook Islands Māori, and Tuvaluan. No ea, I'm Susana Sriswiki, and today on The Detail, I'll be looking at why minor languages need to be preserved. Joining me is a familiar voice on our airwaves.
Talofa toko ingoa ko Malama Tipole.
Long-time broadcaster Marama Tipole is a proud South Islander of Tuvaluan and English heritage. But with hardly any Pacific people in the deep south, how was she able to connect with her Tuvaluan culture, let alone with the language?
It's funny you say that because it actually was very invisible in my life, my Tuvaluan culture. There was hardly any Tuvaluan family. We didn't have a Tuvaluan church, no aunties. There was nothing really I could see that represented my father's culture. Plus, my dad spent a lot of time in Samoa, so he would speak Samoan to other Samoan people. So I couldn't even hear his language, in fact. I would see him sometimes on the telephone talking to someone overseas, and he was talking in this other language. And I realised from a child he was speaking Tuvaluan to his family back in Tuvalu. So despite that, there was this gnawing inside of me that wanted to connect to my Tuvalu side. And in fact, I always felt like there was something missing. And even when I came to Auckland and I was surrounded by a lot of our Tuvalu families and community up here, I still felt like I was not present. I couldn't really participate properly, converse with the ladies or the aunties in their language. It just felt like I was a bystander. I was just watching, and there was something in me that wanted to participate in the laughter and the stories and the talanoa that was happening, whether it was, sitting on the papa, on the mats, on our lounges in Henderson and Massey, and I did really feel I was missing something. Felt like there was this jigsaw piece within me, or this little hole in me that was missing, and so I always longed to be able to speak Tuvaluan fluently. Growing up, my mum was Pākehā, so we didn't speak it in the home because my dad wanted to. He didn't want her to feel left out, I guess. So it was a long journey, I took Te Reo Māori classes at school, and that really helped pave a foundation, I guess, towards my speaking my Tuvalu language, because there's so many similarities that cross over. When I was about 17, we went to the islands, and then that again helped ignite something in me that I really wanted to come closer to my culture. When I was about 25 or so, my father said to me, "You're going to be in charge of our Sunday school." He was a Presbyterian minister of a Tuvalu church. And so I obliged and became the Sunday school dame. I'm not sure what it's called. But all of our congregation couldn't speak English properly at that time. Many of the grandmas and the older aunties that were there. And every month they would ask me to do a report back to the congregation. I would speak in English and they would be saying, "Speak in Tuvaluan." So in my broken language, I would try and start reporting back to them about what was happening. And gradually, over 7 years while I was doing that, I started to speak the language more. What happened in doing that and being able to speak with them is that suddenly this hole that I'd had growing up had disappeared. This jigsaw puzzle was complete. And there was just this great sense of well-being inside of myself, being able to talk to the old ladies in their language, not them trying and fumbling around in my language of English. these old ladies I thought were religious and very straight. When I'm driving in a big car transporting them all somewhere, and I have about 5 or 6 aunties, oh boy, the things they were talking about when you can understand them was amazing. So it opened doors for me able to speak to our elders and then hear their stories, share their stories, and then really connect with our community in a way I couldn't if I was not Tuvaluan. Also, even being a journalist and connecting into the community, I'm able to, reach deeper into what's really happening, by them being able to share in Tuvaluan back to me as well.
So in terms of fluency, are you at the level that you want to be at in terms of speaking Tuvalu?
No way. I would say now I'm maybe 60%, not quite. I married my husband, and when we met, he couldn't speak English properly, fluently, and my fluency in Tuvaluan was not quite there either. So it's been a journey over the last 10 years where we are now, I guess, semi-bilingual in our home, and that's been amazing. So I can hear him sometimes listening to the Tuvalu, TV online and listening to the, updates of what's happening back home and watching that on social media. And sometimes I sit down beside him and I can kind of follow, most of what's being said, but I have to get him to fill me in.
How do you muster up the courage to speak Tuvaluan in front of your family and close peers? Because for me, having been born and raised in New Zealand, obviously I'm very proud of my Samoan culture, but I lack that confidence speaking for Samoa because I want to avoid the criticisms and avoid, my family calling me plastic. So for you, how did you work up the courage to be able to speak Tuvaluan at the level that you're at currently?
I think for me, I just wanted to keep trying despite failing, and even if I look silly, but I don't know if perhaps I have been given a pass because I am half Balangi, that maybe some of my relatives are more forgiving and allowing me that space for that, whereas I think maybe they'd be more critical of others who are full Tuvaluan. There's those kind of innuendos happening in our community. And then I really do think the Tuvaluan community, they are a lot more open and forgiving to people getting it wrong. I've heard other communities where they're as you're saying from your own experience, really dissing you if you were getting it wrong. But they're a lot more encouraging and really just want to see us get our language right. Yeah, I think there's some other things happening in my own community where we've got really strong church community culture there where the language is being spoken in. And, you have these many islands where they're promoting their own dialect for each of their own churches. So it's very strong there within our community despite it being very small. Also, we're a more recent migrant community, so, like the Samoan or Tongan communities, I wonder what will be happening to us in another 2 or 3 generations.
How does it make you feel when you see and read reports of some of our Pacific languages, including Tuvaluan, being listed as endangered by UNESCO?
I do feel worried about that because everything that we see and embrace, for example, in New Zealand, of our culture, the amazing dance, the bese, the music, we see it represented in the arts, dance. It's language that really is that beating heart of that body, that if it's not strong and still being spoken, how else can bese and dance and siva be represented without language? And I think, like myself as a young child, with that gnawing or that hole within me, it's similar in terms of it's broken, unless it's whole. And it really is the sin that holds the bowl of the whale together. Language, I just feel really worried about what's going to happen if we lose that within our communities, especially here in New Zealand. I look at our young people and I do feel worried for them. You know, they know they're very much New Zealanders in this space over here. But there's something within, I feel, people's identity that's calling home or talking to, whether it's, you say, tupuna ancestors, or you're speaking to what breathes life within our very communities, that's calling back to, I think, who we are. And I think when we're embracing that and who we are in terms of our identity as a whole, I feel people are more at peace with themselves. They're able to be everything that they are. It's not everyone's journey, but I know that for me, having embraced that and walked down this journey, it has been hugely rewarding to be able to understand the bese, the hymns that have been sung in my church now, understand the songs and the phrases and the proverbs and the stories, the tala that my old people are speaking to me, has just taken on a whole new life for me, and I'm really grateful for that journey.
Were you able to hold conversations in Tuvaluan with your dad before he passed on?
Yes, it was quite special. My dad, when he was very sick, and he also had some strokes, and he began speaking in Tuvaluan, and I remember speaking to him in Tuvaluan, before he passed, in those days when he was very ill. It was such a gift to be able to talk to him. Even I spoke to him on his deathbed and wished him well,
The three main ways a language thrives are where it's used, the resources used to support it, and most importantly, young people hearing and speaking it. But what if those factors aren't there and we allow endangered languages to die? Dr. John Middleton is a language and linguistics lecturer at the University of Auckland. I began by asking him what the benefits are of being bilingual or multilingual.
It's an amazing skill, and it's something I don't have, which is always heartbreaking for me. It's an amazing skill. It actually allows your brain to do some really amazing things, because when a brain picks up two languages, it's not only able to speak both of those languages, it's somehow able to separate them as well. So there is an ability for these completely complex grammatical structures or sounds in one language that don't occur in the other, and your brain is able to tell you exactly which one to use at what time. So what we find is that, say in children, maybe bilingual children can be slower to finally get all the vocabulary items, for example, across multiple languages. But their brains are really well developed because they are able to speak multiple languages.
Now, for myself personally, I grew up hearing the Samoan language, but yet I'm not confident. I haven't quite mastered Samoan. So do you think it's ever too late to attain fluency in another language?
Not at all. I think a lot of people have that same feeling, that feeling that you're just not quite good enough. And the reality is, any amount of language is good enough. Of course, the more you use it and the more you learn, the more fluent you can get. And you can do that throughout, people's lives. We know that children are the most absorbent when it comes to language, but that doesn't stop adults, even really old people, being able to learn a language.
A few Pacific languages, though, are listed as endangered according to UNESCO. But how do we determine that a language is at a crisis stage?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of different factors that are ranked in order to decide whether a language is endangered. So some of them we've mentioned before, the domains of use, the intergenerational transmission, the resources have we got, literacy stuff to work on? Trying to figure out whether one language is endangered or not is really, really difficult, because in a way it's a comparison thing. I think the biggest factor worldwide is whether the language has a population of young speakers. Because the reality is a language can completely die in one generation. If no children are taught the language, then that language could die within 20, 30 years. So the most important factor is that transmission. And when they do the rankings to determine language endangerment, they really focus heavily on that. Are the young people speaking it?
Don't you think it's a little dramatic, though, to say that a language could die, considering we have access to all these digital tools that can help with preservation?
Yes, we have some amazing tools that can really help. Languages are inherently human, and so no matter what documentation we can do, it always comes down to whether people are using the languages. So it does feel sometimes like it is dramatic to think that a language can die, but we've seen it so many times before. We've seen it even in our own country with the Moriori language. Within 70 or so years, we found this language that was spoken in the Chatham Islands lost its last native speaker. So in some ways, yes, it is dramatic to say that a language will die, but then we look at Australia, for example, and there's 20 plus languages in Australia right now that have 1 to 12 speakers, I think it is. So I think the reality is all the tools that we have now are really helpful for protecting languages and really valuable. However, we do still need languages to be spoken and to be written and to be used.
Talk to me about the Moriori language. Are there efforts at the moment to try revitalise that language?
Yeah, it's a really great example of a language that lost its native speakers, but there is now very much a push on the island to start using that language again, and you hear it around in the day-to-day conversations. There's signs on the streets that you can see the language being used. So there is definitely a keenness and an interest in making that language heard again.
Maui Solomon has been instrumental in the revival of Moriori culture in many forms. The Details spoke to him last year about efforts to revive the language when the basis of knowledge of it is so small.
The last fluent speaker of Moriori died around 1900, 1902. So, and there are no recordings of the language, but we're fortunate in the sense that a lot was written down, particularly by Hirawana Tapu, who was the leader for Moriori throughout the 19th century. And he was the one who wrote the 131-page petition to Governor Grey in 1862, and in collaboration with one of the settlers down here, Alexander Shand, he compiled a book of the traditions, the karaki, the prayers, the rongo, the songs, and the stories of Moriori that remained at that time, and that's about 1890. And he went around and consulted with the surviving elders at that time. So there's, I'd say 70%, probably 60% was lost, but there was a lot that was written down thanks to Tapu and Shand, and is now in archives and publications, and some is in private archives. So we can draw on that base of information to help reconstruct the language. It's a huge task, but it's been done in other countries. Aboriginal cultures are doing that today. It's been done by the Celts in Wales and in Ireland, the Gaelic language. Kohanga reo, they at least there was a much stronger foundation for te reo Māori to reconstruct. So, as I say, we're fortunate. We've got a fluent speaker of te reo Māori in Kiwa, but he's also dedicating himself to learning in Āre moriori and running workshops and online webinars and things like that. And for me, that's probably the most important thing that can happen going forward, is to relearn our re and our karaki and our rongo, because it's one thing having the hardware, all of the beautiful marae and so forth and so on, but unless you have the software to go with that, it's pretty meaningless. It's just a set of kind of assets and resources. So that's a real challenge that we face as a people now.
So it is a really good example, and there are languages where we've seen it totally revived. There's some Native American ones where the last speaker was maybe 100, 200 years ago, and they've completely created a new generation of speakers by teaching little kids, and now they're growing up to be native speakers of that old language. A really famous example is Hebrew. It at one point had no native speakers, and through texts they were able to basically bring it back, and now it is a thriving language. So it's really impressive the way that people can bring a language back if there is that motivation.
How is society worse off with the loss of a language?
There's many, many reasons why the languages themselves have immense value. One of them is the cultural and scientific even knowledge that languages hold. An example I remember is fish in Native American, one of the Native American languages, where the names of the fish actually connected them genetically, that the Western European invaders had no idea about. So with a loss of a language like that, we lose that knowledge and we lose that cultural understanding. I think also languages are a huge part of people's identity, I suppose. And so a loss of a language also erodes that identity. So it's not a countable reason or quantifiable reason that languages are so valuable, but it's clear to people and clear to people using them that their language is hugely important.
Once there are a dozen or 24 people who can stand around, ka pau rangi tokona in the centrepiece of our kopenga marae on Rīkohu and recite their own rongo, their karaki, and to speak in Tāre Moriori, then I'll die a happy man. But it's going to be a long and difficult journey, and it's going, like anything, you need to have champions of these things.
That's it for today. Thank you to our guests, Marama Tipole and Dr. John Middleton. The Detail is funded by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. I'm Susana Suisuiki, Vayaksia and Tofa.